under-18 division, but nobody really expected him to come in and, produce as an 18-year-old. But I think scored 9 goals in his first 15 games and then had 6 goals and 8 points in the World Championships this year. This is a guy who came onto that scene and to play hockey there and, started dominating immediately. He's got an incredibly powerful shot. This is a little bit different than what you'd see from someone like Eeli Tolvanen, where, he's got that big windup and that laser shot. I mean, the power comes out of his wrist and you don't see much of a windup or the stick bend. All of a sudden it's rocketing past you. He's a much stronger, he's got a game where he can work the middle a little bit more in there, Tolvanen or somebody like that. I don't want to keep comparing him to Tolvanen, but that's kind of the easiest comparison I've heard from people. But, he can work the middle. He can get in there and drive in to open up lanes and things like that. He's a very good passer as well. Kind of reminds me of the passing ability that Ryan Johansson has, something that's a little bit underrated, I think. But I mean, they were expecting him to drop, go in the top 10, and, the top 10 shook out a little bit odd with some of the guys dropping, but I'm sure that they rushed, to get this guy because he's been fantastic so far, is what we can see. And there's a lot of opportunity for him to grow. But this is a guy that, they've got to the playoffs, which unfortunately meant that they didn't get into the draft lottery. So they're going to pick, 17th. They're just outside the playoffs, and they still managed to get a top 10 talent. And, that's fantastic. And I think that they did a really good job of identifying that, especially since they didn't have a 2nd round pick this year.
Why do you think they didn't tender David?
It's just been one of those that he was a guy that they drafted back in 2017. He played 4 years at Bastin alongside Dante Fabro for part of that. And he was one of those exciting guys that they thought that he was developing right alongside Fabro. He was going to be that Fabro type player. He stayed at Bastin for the 4 years, and then he came to Milwaukee last season for his first pro year, on the 2nd year of his 2-year entry-level deal, and had, I believe, 1 point or 1 goal and like 8 points, I believe, like that. I mean, just really something that 1 goal and 13 points in 50 games. So not what you want to see. Obviously, defenseman, yes, but that's not what you want to see. You think that a guy that, you've had have been in the system for 4 years, you've given him a deal, he should show up in Milwaukee, a very good team in the AHL, and just really couldn't stay in the roster or was getting those bottom pair minutes. And so I think it was just one of those where Nashville had to move on from him. They could have given a little bit more time, and they still could be negotiating with him. They didn't tender him. They may have not wanted to, give him as much as a qualifying offer would give. So, maybe they're negotiating now, to get him back, at league minimum, but it'll be curious to see, because no other team, he's been a trade piece that we've heard rumors about in the past that teams wanted him, as a prospect. But the fact that he hasn't been signed yet could mean that, he's working on wanting to stay with Nashville.
I like it. In terms of free agency, though, slow start.
Yeah.
What do you think is ultimately going to happen here in free agency?
It's really, really hard to tell you that. I mean, have had about 5 signings. And I think those first 5 were all AHL guys. Milwaukee fans are ecstatic. I mean, they've got some really great guys. They got a guy who was the former last year's AHL Defender of the Year. They've got some really good players, and they brought in some other guys and re-signed some guys. So that's going to be great. But, we're trying to figure out what's going to happen with the Predators. Luke Cunningham gets traded away. Matthew Olivier gets traded away. You start to see all the free agents that, like David Riddick and stuff like that. They're all signing with other teams, but we're watching guys come off the board. And obviously I didn't think Nashville was going to be a player for a Johnny Gaudreau or somebody like that. He may have been a priority when, if Forsberg deal fell through, but he wasn't going to make a big splash. So I didn't quite expect them to go for a huge fish right now, but I expected a little bit of something. Some of that middle 6 depth. I think they're good on defense right now, especially with adding Ryan McDonough. I think that was actually a very good add, but they're waiting, and names are starting to fly off the board. I mean, now I think the top 2 free agents that are out there are Nassim Kadri and Patrice Bergeron, which Bergeron, I think there's indications that he's going to stay in Boston. He'd be a fantastic get if they could do it. And Kadri, I've heard Nashville talked about before, as interested in him in the past, but not a lot of talk now. I think there's still a chance he returns to Colorado, but he had such a fantastic year. So there's not as much out there. There are guys that Mason Marchment, I thought was great and would be an excellent signing. He went to Dallas, and you hate to see that. But there's a couple guys still out there. I think there's Niederreiter, who's been kind of an exciting two-way forward in Carolina. 24 goals, 44 points last season. I think that's exactly the type of guy you want to have on your second line with Ryan Johansson or Mikael Granlund, because of his creativity and his ability to kind of, be a playmaker. They didn't have that on the second line before, so he's still available. Obviously, there's Phil Kessel, who's kind of just the crowd favorite for everybody, just for whether it's his ability or the memes and his love of hot dogs. I'm not sure, but they're both good. And, he'd be that guy who's been there forever. He's been in the league forever. He's, that veteran. He'd be a fun ad, and he can still score. He can still play. This isn't kind of like some of the veterans that Nashville's added in the past, like, your oh gosh, what's his name? I'm trying to think. Wayne Simmons and stuff like that. Like, they were good for what they were, but they weren't going to come in there and change the game. There wasn't a guy that was going to be, first star of the game for 2 or 3 games, every month. I think he has a chance to impact like that. And there's been a lot of talk about Phil Kessel in Nashville. So I'm curious to see if that gets done. I don't think that's the answer to fix a lot of the issues, but hopefully they do something. And of course, you've got guys like Calle Jarnkrok who are back free agents. And, that's me turning my analyst or my writer brain off. I'm like, yeah, I just want Calle Jarnkrok back because I liked him, and then someone's like, well, why? I'm like, cause, is that good enough answer for you?
Just because.
Yeah, he was a good fit. He wasn't frustrating. I don't think I got mad watching him play hockey. So it's like, yeah, I'll take that.
That's not bad.
Yeah,
that's a good answer. We'll end on this. So they signed a goalie, and this ruffled some feathers, and this seems pretty split on how Preds fans feel about this. Where did you land on this?
Yeah, so like I said, with David Riddick, obviously they announced pretty much the second the season was over that they weren't planning on bringing him back.
Yeah.
So they knew that he was going to be gone, which is fine because he was just a very serviceable backup. You didn't want more than 10 games or 20 games out of him a year. And so, the thought was that after we saw Connor Ingram get called up and have a pretty good performance against the Avalanche in one of those games or a couple of those games in the playoffs, the expectation was that Ingram would be the Saros' full-time backup in Nashville. You would get, Devin Cooley or, we'd have Askarov in Milwaukee, for his first North American, pro hockey experience, be playing that and getting ready because he's not ready for Nashville yet, obviously. And, so that